Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Denver. I was so excited that we were here this year because I live here. And so welcome to the colorful state of Colorado. If you are not from here, if you are from Colorado, you just know how awesome it is. And so let's wrap our arms around our friends and say, welcome to the Mile High City. We are going to have a wonderful conversation to launch our conference this morning. And if you were with us last year, does anybody remember where we were last year, what state? Ohio, yes, there's some good people that were here. This is good. We were in Ohio last year, and we started our first in this series now, because I can say that we're doing it for our second year, so that this is a series, right? We had our first series of Millennial Mind Sunrise Conversations. And last year, the conversation was really interesting because we got to talk about the global agriculture market. This year, our topic is a little bit different, but we've brought back millennials to bring you insights that I know you want to hear. Now, we're going to talk about traceability, of course, because that's our topic of the week. And as we go through, I want to just bring a couple of things to your attention. The young women that you're going to see on our stage today are not traceability experts. Shocker, right? But what they are experts in, it's just understanding how people like them think, because they are that millennial bubble that everybody talks about, right? When we think about the world of food, millennials is just like that topic that everybody goes, oh yeah, I know that everybody's been telling me I need to understand what they think, right? Because they have that biggest share of pocket. Right? And so you go and talk to a retailer, you go and talk to anybody that's trying to sell any kind of widget in the whole wide world, and they all know we have got to understand what these guys are thinking about because they have the power. Right? And so when you think about millennials, you can go and Google, and there will be lots of different data, right? Because research is research. Everybody wants to get into their minds. And I was reading the other day, doing my own research, right? Because I love millennials. I think they're awesome. I'm not a millennial, right? I'm a little bit older. But there was this new thing that I read from the USDA. It was the Economic Research Service published a report. And there was just a couple of things I wanted to share with you about how they think, and especially around food and agriculture. It says, millennials consume food in a restaurant or bar around 30%. Ooh, we got some mood. I like that. Around 30% more often than any other generation. Millennials spend significantly less time eating at home than any of our older generations. They also devote the smallest share of food expenditures to grains, white meat, and red meat. And they are all about convenience, and we know this. They want the ready-to-eat stuff, but they also don't want just convenience. They want the experience that goes with it. They want to have the feels, all the feels, they say, about understanding about the story of that food that they are going to consume. Whether it's an easy, Hello Fresh kind of meal, or if they want to go and have that restaurant experience, they want to feel that connection. And so they place a high level of importance around that convenience and those experiential attributes of what they are consuming and what the environment is that they're living in. They also have lots of different characteristics that I can't put into one bucket. A lot of people always ask me, they're like, you work with millennials, you study millennials, so what do I need to know about millennials? And I would say, well, you just can't put one broad brush over them. Right? And a lot of people will also say that millennials are, they're just the students, they're the young ones. And I have to remind everybody in the room that the older millennials are like 35. Right? And so they're not just babies. Right? They're people that are out there with families. They're people that are out there really staking their claim and making a difference in our world. And I'm excited to bring a few amazing millennials to our stage this morning to give you even more insights to the complexity that they are, and ultimately to give you some thoughts that help to frame this conversation that we're moving through over the next couple of days around traceability. Now, I've got 4 chairs up here and 5 buckets of people that you see there, because we had one young lady who was on her way this morning and she was hit and ran, and her car is no longer drivable. And so our pre-med, our future doctor who wants to cure cancer, Sierra, who is on your page there, she's not able to join us, but she sends her best wishes. And she's okay, so that's awesome. But with us, we do have 4 amazing millennial minds. We have somebody that is going to be taking care of animals, right? I know many of you in this room are veterinarians or have devoted your life to animal care. And so we have a pre-vet student. We have somebody who is a millennial CEO, right? We know that entrepreneurism is bigger than ever in today's world. And so we've got somebody who has decided to say, you know what, I've tried the traditional school road and I'm going to go and work for myself right now. I'm not going to wait. And so we have a Colorado CEO that you can hear from today. We also have with us a 5th-generation cattle producer from Colorado. And so you're going to hear somebody that understands all of the pieces of what it's like to raise our products, right? To raise animals for that end user in mind. And then our final panelist that will join us is somebody who kind of grew up in the horse and hay world on the East Coast and is really interested in agriculture policy. And so going back and really influencing what's happening in Washington. And so we've got a nice mix of millennial voices in this room. And please know we're going to have time for you to ask questions as well. And so if there's something that you really want them to address, just let us know. So we've got great people in the room. You're in the room. Let's go ahead and dive into our conversation. Before we do that, I should introduce myself. I'm Sarah Bohnenkamp, and I have the distinct pleasure of being a contractor for NIAA. And this is, I believe, my 3rd conference that I've been to. And my job is to help with communication and leadership and to have conversations that matter. So I'm going to be here today helping us move through traceability. And with that, let's talk about a definition of this really complex topic. Now, as we were preparing for all of this dialogue today, I reached into my network. You know, I've got my women here that are ready to share, but I have, lots of different people that are curious about this conversation. And I do a fair amount of work in Montana. And so I called one of my Montana millennial ranchers and I said, all right, if you were to define traceability, how would you do it? And I thought his definition was really cool. He says, you know, Sarah, it's an uninterrupted history of ownership. It's about location, origin, to consumption. And I thought that was cool, and it started to get me to think. I'm like, I wonder how each of you in this room would define traceability. Is it that simple? And so I thought, well, let's ask our panelists how they might define it. And so the first definition that was shared was a reliable documentation of a product as it goes from point A to point B, or C, D, E, and F, right? Because we know, especially in the cattle world, that it can go through several hands. So you guys like this definition? Give me a little bit of feedback. Yay? Woo! Oh, we got a little pounding on the table. I like it. Okay. Let's see about number 2. See if it's any different. So this definition was an opportunity to increase awareness about where food comes from, while creating a transparency that can drastically improve and impact both animal and human health. So what do you think? Awareness? Human health? Animal health? Interesting view. And now let's see number 3. Number 3 is about holding ourselves accountable, and our businesses accountable to obtain accurate records which can provide valuable insight for business growth and consumer trust. There's some cool buzzwords in there, don't you think? What do you think? Yeah? Woo! No? Maybe? Let's see number 4. Now this one is short and sweet. What do you think about this? A product supply, it's a product supply chain map. It's like, that's pretty sad. Yeah? It goes here, through the chain. What happens? Made sense to me. What do you guys think? Yay? Nah, we're liking these first ones, I guess. And then the final one, our 5th definition, a necessary future for the industry to provide our consumers assured safety and provide the producer with a simple way to allow them to meet regulations that they face. There's that R word. Ooh, everybody loves that. Yeah. So we've got 5 definitions, and I'm curious if you can tell me which definition belongs to whom. So ladies, could you please come up here? See if you can do some guessing. Is there some kind of a mix? Do you think that the CEO has a particular piece here? Do you think that the producer, which one was the producer definition? Any guesses? These ladies are going to line up in the order to which they came up with the definitions. All right. I left the fifth one up there because I'm curious if you guessed the doctor who's not here. So with that, I'm going to have each of these young ladies introduce themselves, and they're going to tell us which of the categories they represent, and then they're going to tell us just who they are, where they are from, and really at the end of the day, why did they care to be here to talk about traceability today?
My name is Maddie Young, and my definition was that it's reliable documentation. I'm from Austin, Texas. I'm the pre-vet major, and I really wanted to be here today to kind of speak on behalf of keeping animal welfare in mind and keeping that, improving that and keeping animal disease to a minimum.
Awesome.
Hello, my name is Konieczka, and my definition is surrounding accountability and records. I am from Colorado, and I wanted to be here today because I think traceability is a really interesting topic, and it can be applied to a lot of different industries.
Nice.
My name is Kara Smith, and I'm a rancher out in Sterling, Colorado area. My definition was pretty science-minded, just basically that product supply chain map, just going from point A to point B and having a map all the way across. The reason that I'm here is I think it's important to have these conversations that matter. As you can see, of course, I'm a millennial rancher, and that gives you a little different perspective as far as talking to other millennials every day. And I really think it's important to have a conversation from both sides of the fence, whether it's production onto our actual consumer side.
Nice.
Good morning, I'm Rachel. I grew up on the East Coast just outside of Washington, D.C. My definition was the last one for assured safety. I wanted to be here today. I'm a student at Colorado State, and I just want to keep learning about the different aspects of agriculture so I can hopefully go in and make a difference in the world of policy, both here in Colorado and in D.C.
Awesome. Please welcome our panelists. All right, ladies, have a seat. So we've got a nice mix of perspectives, even geography of where you were raised, East Coast, Texas, Colorado. And so we're going to dig in and have a bit of a dialogue around a question that I think is on lots of people's mind. It's like, so we were talking yesterday with Undersecretary Eibach, and he said, it's been nearly 2 decades that we've been talking about traceability. I was like, holy moly, 2 decades, that's a really long time. So why is this such a big deal in animal agriculture today? Like, what's the big deal? Why now are we here with this topic? And so we've got several different categories, and you're going to poll one of these categories, and you're just going to answer the question from the perspective of what's written on your card. So go ahead and tell us what's on your card and why you think it matters.
So my card says producers, and I think that traceability is important for producers. It helps with good business. It's great for animal owners, and not to mention when traceability is used, not only, for a starter, traceability can help you actually reduce cost and improve economically, and it can improve your business's reputation.
So I want to hold that just for a second, Maddie. So you're talking about the economic piece and producers. Like, what kind of data can help them when you think about traceability? Like, make the connection. Do you have any examples or thoughts?
Yes, actually. For instance, I was reading a few days ago that using, for instance, if we use blockchain technology for traceability, you can store all your information in a cloud. And if you're doing the most effective way of agriculture, whether it be with animals or plants, then you can do the most cost-effective way and really utilize all your resources.
Awesome. So you have data, you can say, how do I make the best decisions with what I can see, and then move forward. Great. Exactly. Now, since we have a producer on the panel, I want you to answer it too. Why is it such a big deal for people that are in your shoes?
That's a great question, and I value data. I think we can track so much and improve what we're doing on our operations day to day if we do have that kind of data, and we can track it all the way, from origin to consumption. However, it is a bigger deal in our industry because there's a fear factor around traceability, especially in the beef cattle industry. It's not necessarily because there's things that are happening that are bad. It's just more a scary thing to be able to have that kind of open door policy. And we've taken it to a different level of having a branded beef program to talk about what we are doing from basically conception to cradle, because it is an important concept to get out to our consumer, our millennial consumers, because they do want to understand where their food comes from. I'm blessed that I was raised on a ranch and I was born into this industry, but many millennial consumers aren't, and they don't understand what we do, and to them that's scary, and to us as producers it's scary to open our doors to have that kind of conversation with a millennial because they feel like there may be some sort of fear factor along with that. But I guess I'm here to say that it really isn't scary from both sides of the fence. It's just a conversation to have with our millennial consumer about what we're doing and how we're doing it.
So, Kara, I want to add on to your thought. So you're fifth generation. And so I'm curious how the old guard feels about this, kind of push for this transparency and, I'm going to open the barn door, if you will. Like, how does your family feel?
That is an interesting question, Sarah. Of course, I do have a different perception because I am a millennial, and pretty much everything most millennials do every day is either out on social media or some sort of transparency there from your phone. So there's really no sort of closed doors anymore like we want to think that there is. There's a lot of transparency that's already happening, but we as producers, it's a little more difficult to convince the baby boomer generation, which in ag we are at a point in time where we're more or less passing the guard from that baby boomer generation onto the millennial generation to make some of these decisions within our operations. And it's a topic of conversation. It can be, more, I wouldn't want to say heated, but there's a lot of different perspectives around it on how we do that and how we do it appropriately, because we're very independent in what we do. That's why we started ranching in the early 1900s, and it's that entrepreneurial mindset, and we're independent in what we do every day on our operations. But there's a consumer out there that really does want to know what we do and how we do it and why we do it. I don't think that there needs to be that fear. It's more of let's just talk about what we do. Maybe I open our doors, and I guess everything doesn't have to be completely wide open, because the livestock industry is, it's different than maybe a common millennial may understand as far as some of the things that we do every day, because we're caretakers of those animals, and that's our job. We're there to be stewards of that. So
nice. So you're out there saying my day is already out there on social. There's transparency is a part of the world that I live in, and so you get to kind of peek and show the old guard, or you have conversations that are heated. But do you see a shift with the producer attitude? Or not?
I think there is. I want to say it's classified as the baby boomer generation. They want to understand, but they also, I think, feel like it's some of our job in the millennial realm to have those conversations.
Ooh, so you see a shift of like, okay, we understand this, but we want you to deal.
That's what I see personally. Is they're like, we understand and we know the consumer's changing, but also we've been doing this way for many years, and there's that openness to say, maybe we've been doing it like this, but there is an opportunity. So you as a millennial, you can go out there and capture that opportunity.
Ooh. So would you guys agree? Optimism and kind of a shift from producer attitude? Would you agree with our millennial producer? I see one little hand. Any others? A couple others? Yes. Excellent. All right, now let's shift and look at our next little category. Bailey, let's go. Who did you have on your sheet?
So my card is the government, and
Ooh.
that first makes me think of, I guess, the role of blockchain technology, kind of pulling the government out of that main regulation role. And I know agriculture is already a really heavily regulated industry. So I think this traceability has definitely the potential to maybe kind of separate those a little bit more.
Ooh.
And to make it, more of an open ownership of every party that's involved, so that it's a better communicated industry and not so just regulation.
Interesting. So that there's this opportunity with the way that the regulation works, or the technology, that like we don't have to have government as the owner of all of the data. Like this blockchain, it can be a little bit more open, free flowing. It doesn't have to be like just kind of top down.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I like that. Anybody else have any thoughts about the government side? Like why do the regulators care about traceability? Anybody else? Yeah? There we go. I'm the policy girl. She's like, yes, let me see it.
I think it's important to have sort of the farmers and ranchers to be able to do their thing. I think they're the experts in it, and we should let them continue to do that. But I also think from a consumer standpoint, they look to the government, and so I think it's important to have like good communication there, and I think traceability offers that and helps the consumer feel comfortable in what they're eating. And I think us in our generation as millennials, people are more concerned about it than they ever have been. So I think this aspect of traceability really just helps keep everyone sort of honest, and everyone able to keep doing what they're doing, the producers doing what they're doing, and consumers continuing to buy what producers are making. So I think it's important.
Right, so you see that there's a really important role for government there, because the consumer absolutely looks for that guidance there. The producer's got a role, and so it's a really nice kind of synergistic piece.
Yeah.
Nice. I love that. So who's on your category, or what category do you have?
So mine said retailers, which I also think is an important part of like that communication role, because they're like sort of that middle player. They're selling the meat that's being produced and whatnot, and I think too often people don't realize that their meat is grown and produced, and that Kara here has a hand in it. I think they sometimes think that their meat comes from the grocery store. So while it does come from the grocery store, I think that retailer has a really important part to say, like, here's where it's coming from, and here's how I know the stuff I'm selling you and stuff I'm buying is really important. It is safe too. As well as like the restaurants, you're saying, millennials always go to restaurants. So how do they know like what they're eating, where it's coming from? And I think it's funny, in growing up in the East Coast, I never thought about anything. And moving out here to Colorado, and now I think about like, oh, where is the beef I'm eating raised and whatnot. And every time I go home, I try and look for it on the menu, because it normally says it. And my family makes so much fun of me. They're like, since when do you care about that? And it's like, well, it's really important. And, often I'd rather eat fruits and veggies that were grown here in the U.S. and that kind of stuff. So I think that's also an important aspect. So we know that we can support our own people out here.
Right. So one of the things that I find really curious is that we've got so many choices with what we eat, right? And traceability, I think at some level gives us like the opportunity to like see, right? Okay, well here this is organic, or this is U.S. based, or this is however grass finished, or all these different adjectives, right? Food with adjectives. So from a retail perspective, do they own that responsibility to have that conversation with the consumer? Like who owns that? That connection point the biggest? I mean, I think we all have ownership, but is it the retailer? Tell me your thought.
Well, I definitely agree that everyone plays a role in that communication piece, but I think the retailer is the easiest role. It's hand in hand, selling it from the grocery store, the people there, they're the ones that are talking to the people who are buying it, or the people in the restaurant are the ones selling it to the people eating the food there. So I think the retailer has a really important role in that communication piece.
Nice. Anybody else have a thought about the retail role and why they care about traceability? All right. Oh, go ahead, Kara.
I do have a thought on that, especially coming from the production side. The fact of the matter is the retailer is the one that's actually touching the customer. They're having those conversations with the consumer, and us on the other side, on the live animal side, basically don't have those kinds of opportunities. So I think it's important to be able to, even from us on the production chain, to have those conversations with the retailer to where they can appropriately tell that story, whether it's through traceability or whatever the means may be. I think there may be a piece there that we are missing by not completely engaging our entire supply chain, whether that means the traceability side or what it means, but we really do need to be able to have those conversations with our consumers, or educate the ones who are, or engage with them to where that can be a better conversation. So,
awesome. All right, well, let's move on to our next category. Let's pull one from the cup there. Got a good one? Ooh, you kind of already started to talk about that. Go ahead.
So this one says millennial consumers. So I think we've touched on that a lot, really, on how the millennial consumer now is starting to think more about where their food comes from, and they're discovering things. And I think being at a school like Colorado State, you have a really interesting aspect because there's a huge ag school in it and a big ag presence, and I love being part of that. But it's interesting to get outside of it sometimes and hear what people have to say who aren't part of the ag world. And sometimes it's not always great things. And
give us an example of what's not great. Let's get real.
For example, so CSU has just started the slaughter facility on campus, which for all of us ag students is really cool because it brings the live and dead class to life. We get to really understand and learn all about that. But there are some organizations on campus that disagree with that one because they don't think it's right. And they do have their reasons for whatnot. And I think, that's a perfect example as they think that we're going to start, having huge production of meat at Colorado State. And I think what it really is for us to learn. So I think that's an example of some of the millennial consumers not having that background to understand. And then, when the bad word gets out, it's hard to stop it. So I think traceability will help sort of get ahead of the game and get the good word out because, even coming from the East Coast, being here in Colorado, I've learned a lot about agriculture as a whole and that it is a great thing and that, we can't survive without it. So I think if we got the traceability word out there, it would help the millennial consumer get educated on how food is produced and why we really need to support the farmer and rancher at the end of the day.
Yeah. Now, I would love to hear your perspective coming from Texas, because I've always heard Texas is like its whole other country. Right? And now that you've been in Colorado for a while, what are the millennial consumers, what do you think?
So being from Texas, obviously things like barbecue is like a backbone of almost Texan culture, but I'm from Austin, and in Austin there's actually a huge growing vegetarian population and vegan population. And I think a lot of it is because the fear that millennial consumers have that the animals aren't being treated right or that the diseases aren't being traced correctly. So I think that, having a good traceability and being able to prove to them that, kind of demyth some of those things could really help bring back that market, because over the past 3 years, veganism has rose in the U.S. 600%. So in order to gain that market back, I think that, having a good traceability is very important.
So you think that by just being able to see what's real, that's going to help people be able to make better informed decisions?
Being able to see what's real, but also, there's always room for improvement. Being able to show that you're not treating these animals horribly and showing that diseases are being stopped and that, using blockchain technology, for instance, in individual animal tagging can kind of, if a disease breaks out, you can stop it right then so it doesn't spread, and just kind of minimalizing the fear in millennial consumers.
So we can give them some peace of mind.
Exactly.
Nice. Now, Bailey, would love for you just to give us a couple of thoughts on this before we move to our next question. And I really value your perspective because you're the Colorado Front Range girl, born and raised, not a part of the ag world. So from your perspective, why does this matter so much?
I agree with these other girls as well. I think, social media can play a really big role in agriculture misconceptions, and there's just this missing link that needs to, that communication needs to happen. And I just think that farmers, there's so much opportunity there to really, and I understand there's probably this feeling of not wanting to have to explain why we do, these vaccinations and why we do this feed. You don't want to have to explain that, but I think traceability could really offer this technology that you would just get that point across, and you would be making these, you'd be explaining to the consumer what that looks like, and a little bit of more of what your world is like. And I don't know, that would just fill that gap.
Nice.
I think that's really important.
So what I'm hearing is like that having this picture, right, this chain, is going to help people just have more data. They can feel peace of mind. They can have their questions answered. It can be a way for producers to have a better conversation. Retailers can connect. I love this. This is super cool. So now let's go on to our next question. Are we ready? Oops, we've got black. Haha. All right. So we're going to pull out our crystal balls. We're going to pretend that each one of these young women have been given this special power to forecast into the future of what's going to happen with this whole big deal of traceability. And so as you think about traceability requirements, regulations, consumer pressure, producers and their role and the money, who's going to pay for it, all of these different aspects, I want you to tell me just from your perspective, and we're going to start with Bailey. We'll go this way and then we'll end with you. Just give us a couple of thoughts. Crystal ball, prediction, what's going to happen? Are we going to be here in 20 years?
So what I really see happening, and particularly from a millennial perspective, is that your shopper and your consumer is going to demand this. I kind of view it in the sense of like it's going to trickle down. So if your consumer's demanding it, then eventually your retailers, so like say for example Whole Foods starts to just, everything in Whole Foods is traceable. You can go into there and you can, you know, scan a little QR code on all your little meat packages and everything is going to tell its story, and you're going to know that it was from a good valued and like honest company, and you know, be able to see what these animals ate and just have that whole story. And I kind of view it in the sense too of like, for example, like Walmart, like putting regulations on their sizing and so for their suppliers. So their suppliers, everything that they send in has to be in a certain size, quantity, like their FCCA. So their suppliers, regardless of whether that's convenient or maybe has an added cost to them, are going to do that because they want their things on Walmart shelves. So I kind of view that happening the same way. Unfortunately, it might be a little bit to the supplier's disinterest, but eventually they're going to, you know, have to meet those needs if they want their things to be sold at these retailers.
So your view is it's coming. Consumers are going to demand it. Be ready.
Yes.
All right. Interesting point of view. Kara, how about you?
So a disclaimer, my crystal ball doesn't always work accurately, but if I had to say what my crystal ball would indicate, is I'd have to agree with Bailey. I think it's coming one way or another. Whether it's like in our industry with our BQA programs, you know, that's a program that was essentially self-regulated and is self-regulated by our industry to just continue to do the right thing to increase our consumer confidence in our products. And I see this falling in the same realm. Whether it's going to be mandated by consumers, retailers, all the way down the chain to what we do every day, and or something that we can take the bull by the horns, metaphorically, within our industry and start from, you know, basically conception all the way to consumption.
All right, so Kara agrees, it's coming. Doesn't matter who might say it needs to be there, whether it's the retailer or the government, but it's coming. All right, what do you think, Rachel?
I definitely agree. I think the consumer is such a driving force in the agriculture industry that I think that I definitely agree with everything I have to say. But with that, I think producers will also benefit a lot from this. I think it adds convenience to them as well, whether it's just a little piece of technology that helps them keep track of, you know, what cow got doctored with what. And I think that doesn't necessarily have to be part of, you know, this kind of traceability, but I think it can be integrated into it. And I think as technology advances, it'll help the producer. So while the consumer definitely will demand it at the end of the day, I think the producer would benefit a lot from it, and I think it's really a win-win for both sides of the equation.
All right. So we have another tick mark for yes. Crystal ball coming.
I also agree with everyone. I think it's definitely coming, especially with the rapid rise of technology. I think that the agriculture industry is going to have to follow that rapid rise, and in order to not miss out on major markets like major beef importers, I think people are going to demand that they have some history of where their products are coming from and how they were raised and all of that.
Right. So one of the things that was brought up in conversation yesterday, I asked, why now? Why is this such a big issue? And why is this, the beef world in particular, ready? And the answer that was provided was about exports. Right? That China came and there was this huge opportunity, and there were very few amounts of cattle that were ready to go. And so that export piece that you just touched on is really critical. So I'm curious, any forecasts to see, is there going to be any shifts? Anybody want to talk about traceability and exports?
Kind of going off what you just said, I think that in the future, countries are going to have requirements for certain standards of traceability. So if we want to hit those markets of, huge beef importers, then we need to, give the consumers what they want and have those traceability requirements up to par.
All right. So crystal balls have been viewed, and we've got our final question. So we've talked about there's, retail aspects, producer aspects, government aspects, millennial, all sorts of fun, right? But what's going to be the tipping point? What's going to be that magic thing? How do we get shift, right? What is going to move this industry forward and get a solution? What do you guys think? And let's see, Kara, start us off.
I'm going to backtrack a little bit to the millennial conversation about them driving the change.
Yeah.
And this is something that I try to have conversation with my millennial cohorts is, we're blessed that we've never been hungry. So we have these kinds of great food choices that we can ask our producers for this kinds of traceability, the kind of transparency, all the things that we are asking our food producers and our ag producers to do. But that also does come with a price at the end of the day. Somebody has to pay for these kinds of traceability, the other things, and most millennial consumers are willing to pay a premium for those kinds of products, and that's something that I think we have some conversations around within the production side. Is at the end of the day, especially in the beef cattle chain, we're so segmented. There is somebody somewhere that will have to pick up the cost that it will be associated with these kinds of requirements going forward. It is an inevitable thing, but also at the end of the day, we may need to look at ourselves and say maybe we'll have to pay a little bit more at the end of the day because of these types of things. So I guess I just wanted to be able to have that conversation.
Well, it's an important part of the conversation, because our question is, what's going to drive the industry action? Well, something that's going to drive the industry action is talking about the money piece. Right? Who's going to pay? How does that work? So I think that you've hit on something that's really, really important. What would you add?
I think that is probably one of the things that is at the top of a producer's mind is the economic piece of it.
Right.
The economic piece, being able to balance that. Nobody really wants to talk about money, but at the end of the day, we're in this business because we're in the business. So we have to be able to make it, an economically viable solution and balance that with our consumer demands and recognize that there are additional consumer demands out there, whether we may or may not like it, that is what's being asked of us on the production side. So we have to figure out how to be able to balance that going forward. And having the conversations across both sides of the aisle, from a producer to a consumer, on how we get to this point, and them understanding and empathizing with both sides. We understand a millennial would like this, but we also have to understand, there's things we need to be able to balance and the steps we need to be able to put in place on the actual production chain to be able to get to that point.
Yeah. Before I let you let go of the microphone, I have one more question for you about this kind of future and what it's going to take to shift. You have conversations with consumers on a regular basis, right? Because you sell direct to consumers with your beef product. And I'm curious, what's the loudest thing you're hearing? And not just millennials, but is they're having conversations with you that link back to traceability and that story of their food? What are they asking you?
At the end of the day, a consumer just wants to know where their food comes from. Whether it's we're having these traceability things regulated or however that may be, they really want to understand the story of where their food comes from, and they want to buy from a person. Our supply chain has become pretty segmented, of course, from where we start and where we end up in the hands of our millennial consumer, and they'd like to understand that all the way through and be able to have a conversation with somebody. It's been pretty enlightening for me to be able to have some of those conversations around beef with a front range consumer that doesn't really fully understand agriculture, was not born and raised in it. But just being able to talk to somebody who raises their food, that's really what they're after, if I had to put that into a summation. So,
Wildest question you've received recently about production?
I don't know if I would say it was a question. It was more a bold statement. I had a consumer, we were talking about grass-fed, grass-finished beef, and he was very adamant on what he wanted. He's like, I want it to be raised 100% on grass, finished 100% on grass, and if I could even do away with vaccines, I would do away with vaccines. And I was like, I'm just not even sure what to say to that, but that's what he felt like was best for him and his family. And like I said, I'm not sure exactly where I would have been able to go from there, because the consumer was pretty dead set in what they wanted, and that's what they were going to go find. So.
Interesting. Thank you for that. All right, you can choose which direction you want to go. All right, Ms. Bailey, what's it going to take?
I think the right presentation, definitely. Like I said before, in an already heavily regulated industry, just adding another regulation of like everybody needs to do this traceability is going to be, that's not going to sit well. That being said, I think the millennial tends to gravitate towards this technology a little bit more naturally. And according to the U.S. Labor Department, the average age of a farmer is 58.3, I believe. So I think a lot of, continuing new programs to get young people into farming can be a really important and valid part of this process.
So get the young producers engaged and help to move that forward. I think that's a really cool idea. I hadn't considered that. More focused there. Thank you, Bailey.
You're welcome. I also think that the driving force is going to be monetary for sure. I think that within the meat industry, there's been a little bit of fear recently. Tyson, which is the biggest meat producer in America, recently invested 5% in a plant-based meat because there is that fear that's been happening. So I think that in order to stay in business and keep business strong, I think that will drive traceability to happen.
Awesome.
I think the consumer is growing every day to be curious about where their meat comes from and how the animal was treated before it was gone to slaughter. And I think with that, I think traceability will come in and sort of help answer some of those questions. So I really think the consumer is the driving force here as they continue to ask more questions and ask the rancher to be more open about what they're doing. I think traceability is just such an easy answer to all of those questions, really.
So what's your advice to those that are on the other side, that are over there saying, I get the technology, I get the demand, I get that people say it's secure. How do we get them to come over and just let go of that fear and just dive in?
Yeah, I think it really starts with the younger producer. And as they get educated on what's going on, they will, soon take over the upcoming, ranches, and they'll change the face of agriculture. And I think it starts with our generation, and it starts with my peers in the world of agriculture, and to help us grow into it.
Very nice. Wonderful. Well, what do you guys think about the ideas that these young ladies have offered? Interesting? Got some head? I'm curious if there's anybody in the audience that has a question. You've got 4 people on this stage. ready to serve you and your curiosity. So what question might you ask them? I've got a microphone, I'll run to you. I know that there's somebody. Oh, yeah. Robert, where are you from?
I'm from Georgia.
From Georgia, welcome.
And I'm one of those regulatory guys.
Ah, welcome.
My question to you, and you've beat around the bush and talked about a lot of this, answering my question already, but why is it 20 years later that we're still talking about this? In your mind, what has stopped this from going forward?
Such the ultimate question, the elephant in the room. Why are we still here, ladies?
I think that a lot of times traceability can feel very vulnerable, and maybe it's a competitor sense as well. Like just having everything out there and open feels almost like an invasion of privacy. But I think to overcome that, we have to understand that that communication is really necessary to, what I believe, to, you know, boost and skyrocket that business. And looking at blockchain, I think a common misconception is that it is going to be like completely open, and all your, you know, hard work of deciding exactly how much feed goes into this, like perfecting your business, right, is going to just be out in the open for everybody. And I think from my understanding, blockchain is encrypted, and, you know, the main communication is there, but you're not completely vulnerable and open.
So you think that if we're going to move this like the 20 years, like we've got to be okay with vulnerability?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, interesting. Anybody else want to address that question?
I think a big part of it is that, and, you know, not to like get onto the regulation side of it, but I think people don't have to do it, so they're not gonna, because of the money side, because of the vulnerability side. It's an extra thing for them, and I've talked to some people that I go to school with about their thoughts on this, and they say, well, we've got it set up fine without this, so we don't need to. So I think as we get the producer and the upcoming producer more educated on why this is so necessary and why it's really a helpful tool for them, I think we'll start progressing the conversation.
So because I don't have to, I don't want to, I don't need to, we got to shift that perspective to all the benefits, perhaps. Interesting. Cool. Another thought, question from the audience. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Deborah Wilson.
And where are you from?
Alberta, Canada.
Welcome.
A number of you, there's 3 or 4 of you on the panel there that talked about blockchain today. 2 questions for you. Who can define blockchain? And how are you going to protect people's proprietary business information in blockchain that enables them to be competitive?
Ooh, that B word. Anybody feel, thank you, great question. Anybody feel like you're a blockchain expert on that stage? Because I would be really shocked if anybody could be like, yes, I get it. Anybody?
Definitely not a blockchain expert. I think the ag world is really growing in the technology side of things, and as I slowly learn about the technology of it all, which is like way over my head, I think there's a lot of options for the protection of it, because I think that's a big concern for producers. And I think, I can't give you a direct answer because I just don't know enough about it, but I think there are options as we reach into different aspects of technology and data analytics and how it can help us. I think there are people on the other side of the tech world that can offer solutions to that.
Yeah. And we're going to hear from one, Nigel Gopi, this morning, and I think that he's going to definitely give us some insights there. But I'm curious, anybody else have anything to say about blockchain? Because you go in Google or you go to Twitter and you say blockchain plus traceability, and wow, it's amazing what pops up these days.
Of course, I'm not a blockchain expert either, but I've been reading up a little bit on it the past few weeks to kind of prepare for this conference. And from what it's the same kind of technology that Bitcoin uses, and it's encrypted, and kind of one of its main purposes is to have a safe way to store your data. That way, if a virus, whether it be malware or human error happens, it keeps it safe and doesn't delete it. It's like the cloud like you use on the smartphone.
Nice. Very good. Kara?
So I'm definitely not a blockchain expert by any means. But I must admit my understanding of blockchain and all the other technologies we have out here as a millennial is much more advanced than the baby boomer generation. I still have conversations every day about maybe say, oh, well, I saw this tweet that came across my social media, and I'll have producers look at me and be like, what even is a tweet? Secondarily, what is Twitter? I mean, there's so many technologies that are just rapidly advancing. I mean, just dramatically, even, you know, in our lifetimes, the rate of communication has expedited exponentially. And, you know, we still have quite a few producers that may not even have a smartphone. So we have a big disconnect there from, you know, a lot of the people that are producing our food for the most part, especially the average age being that 58 years old. There's a big disconnect from this conversation about some of us that have the basis of the technology and understand some of it even to a point, of course not to the extent of blockchain, but there is a very, very big disconnect there that I think we all need to be aware of. So.
Right. So we can make no assumptions about what people know about technology. We've got to be able to describe, here's what it looks like, here's what the encryption means, and here's how the data flows, and here's what is vulnerable, here's what is not. It seems like there's a lot of dialogue yet to be had there and understanding. Good. Other questions? I think we have a couple more. We'll start in the back and then we'll come to you next. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Linda Mills. I'm from Temple, Texas.
Welcome.
And one of the things, kind of the overriding themes that you guys kept mentioning, but then didn't seem like it totally came together, as we keep talking about opening the doors and sharing more information, I think, too, we have to consider some really heavy consumer education as well. Because as you open those doors for the consumers to see all the work that's happening, the hard work for the animal welfare, everything else, you open those doors. At the same time, you have to really educate the consumers so the misconceptions don't grow. Does that make sense? It's more of a statement than a question, but I think we really have to consider that as well.
Anybody like to address that consumer education piece? Because it's very true, right? We're saying, okay, I'm doing this production practice, see it, and they're like, oh, wow, tell me more.
So, yeah, I definitely have a couple ideas on that. I think one of the things that I think would be amazing is if we got simple ag education classes in inner city schools. I grew up so close to D.C., and if the high school I went to, I mean, you said FFA, no one knows what you're talking about, but down the street, where there's a bit of like rural area, yeah, FFA was huge. And so I think that's a huge proponent that would help this. If we start teaching young kids in middle school and high school, then they can grow into what this kind of stuff is. And I also think it's important that, you know, where the retailer meets, like it's not just, oh, well, I'm selling to Walmart or Safeway or whatever it might be. I think if we go to one place and we'll say, like, you know, as a retailer, you guys have a job here, and it's not only pleasing the consumer, because yeah, we can't survive if the consumer won't buy from us. But if we don't produce them, there's nothing for the consumer to do. So I think it's a really important job for the retailer as well to add a little bit of education. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. I'm François Elving. I'm from upstate New York, Ithaca. I very much commend you as millennials to be up there on this panel. But then looking back into the room here, we look all very different from what you look like. We are all kind of a certain age, and we have dealt with these questions for those 20 years or a couple of decades. But my question is maybe more also oriented to NIAA and other organizations. How do we get more millennials, more people that look like you into this room to help drive this change? Because we are many of us kind of on the fading side, and I think we need to bring these people in. Not that I have a solution for that, but it's still a question that you might want to address.
Oh, I love that question because it's so true. And we actually talked a bit about this. Rachel and I were like, how can we get these students from CSU and how can we get people from, the Northern Colorado to come down? And what was your reaction when you were talking with people? Rachel, I give it back to you just for a second. Like, why aren't they in the room? What did you hear?
Yeah, so I was actually surprised because I think this is such a cool opportunity. And it's really exciting for me to be here and to sort of get my opinion out there, but also just to learn. You guys are here for a reason. I think there's a whole lot to learn from you. And I sort of went around to some of the people I knew at CSU and said, well, hey, do you want to come down to it? And, well, some of them said, yeah, that sounds really cool, but I don't want to spend the money. So that's one aspect. But the other thing is, I think a lot of people go to school, wherever they go to school, and they expect to get all the education they need to get, sitting in the classroom. So I think for one thing, it's our big ag universities. It's our responsibility to really make students aware that these things are happening, and it's their responsibility to get down here and to learn from it. But yeah, and I also think a lot of students, especially the ones who plan to graduate with their degree and then go home and take over the ranch, I think they're okay with how things work, and I think it's asking them to put in a little extra effort, which is where that millennial thing comes in. And so I think, I was surprised that not more people from school wanted to come down and be here. But once I sort of started getting around to it, right now is a busy time in the semester, so I do understand it. But to sort of answer your question, I think it's a job for us, us sitting up here as passionate millennials, as well as you guys that are going to be hiring us when we graduate, to get everyone involved and passionate and motivated on these big issues.
Yeah. So I heard money is an issue, right? Because they have to have $50, $100, $150, to get here, right? So that's an issue. Asking them to come is one, and you guys being that model pushing out. I'm curious to hear from Maddie, from your perspective, because you also, are having conversations with people in school. Why aren't they here?
Kind of touching on what she said, I think it's important. A lot of people think that they get all the education they need in the classroom, but obviously y'all know much more about a lot of livestock things and farmer things than I do, so I think it's important to actually branch out and get involved to learn more about issues and kind of educate yourself and take the initiative to do that.
Thanks. And Bailey, from your perspective, not being from agriculture, what do you think would engage people to come and want to be engaged? Why did you want to be here? I think that's a good point of view to bring.
I think a cool opportunity might be some kind of, collaboration that you could create where you're bringing young people in to meet with the veterans, for lack of a better word, in the industry, and getting that connection and building those relationships to get a full rounded perspective and be able to kind of make big decisions together.
Yeah, create some win-win there.
Yeah.
Kara, what would you add?
I'm going to speak from a millennial producer perspective on this, on engaging a millennial producer. And I would say first thing would be encouragement for that generation to be involved, and you also showing the willingness to possibly change too. I think it's a very...
Hold the floor. Say it again. Say it again, Kara.
Willingness to change is always, a positive thing. Speaking from these ladies talking about the cohorts they may meet in school that come from a ranch or a farm background and feel like they've learned everything they need to on the ranch and, maybe just in school, and then go back to possibly doing the same thing that their grandparents did and their great-grandparents did. And, that may not be the best thing to drive us forward. Let's be willing and open to have these conversations to drive change and innovation and some of the things that we need in our industry, because we're a very small percentage of the population. We're less than 2% that produces our food, and there's, that other 98+% out there that they're innovating, they're using technology, they're doing all of these things to drive their businesses forward, and if we're not, we're going to be left behind. So we need to be very willing and open to be able to do that and progress ourselves forward.
So it's about innovation. It's about shift. It's about engagement. It's about welcoming the new guard, engaging with the old. Any last words of wisdom from our beautiful millennial minds before we wrap it up? No? Any last minute questions, thoughts? Oh, these guys are excited. Okay, one more. You guys gonna battle it out? Who gets it? You're closer. Go for it.
Jim Logan from Wyoming. And I appreciate those last couple of points. I was going to ask the question before you brought it up, but one of the biggest challenges that we have when we're talking with producers is, well, my dad didn't do it that way and my grandpa didn't do it that way, and it's working for them. Well, there are advantages to moving into some of the more advanced technologies and some of the better techniques. Do you have any suggestions as to how your generation can be convinced to do that?
I do have a couple thoughts on that. Most millennials, and I'm just generalizing, we want to feel like we are making a difference. Is that an accurate statement across the board? So if we can engage in that feeling that we kind of have inherent here to really truly feel like you're making a difference and feel like your voice is being heard as well. There's times, on the ranch when I'm fixing fence and I'm digging a post hole and, Dad may say, hey, maybe we should do it, or this is the way I do it, and I look and be like, man, maybe there's another way, but that's, it's manual labor all the way around, right? But maybe there's an easier way that we could be doing this. Being open to those kinds of conversations. I know it's the way we've been doing it for many years, but it may not be what's going to carry us into the future. So I guess that's my 2 cents from a producer mindset.
Thanks.
I think another aspect is last semester at CSU they had a BQA thing that was a symposium of sorts, and they offered a pretty good rate for students, so a lot of us went up and learned from it, and it was really interesting. But what was really neat to see was that there was my age people, and then there was ranchers who had been around forever there. And I think if we get my generation, people in school now to start learning about it, and then you have those older people who are interested in learning about becoming BQA certified or whatever, that middle gap will have to follow along. So I think you sort of have to pick a target audience and get them engaged in that and learning about, the new ways and why they're better.
That's right. So I think that we've had a really interesting conversation this morning that's brought up lots of different pieces. And I want to leave us with one thought. So these really, really tough issues that we're dealing with in agriculture, whether it's traceability or if it's antibiotics or if it's whatever, are always going to be solved with people. Always, 100% of the time solved with people. There might be technology and other things that support it, but it's the mind and the connection that make things matter. And we've already started to hear a lot about that. And so what I would really hope that we could do with the remaining time before we go into our next session is for people to connect. These young women are going to be here for just a few moments. Please reach out and connect with them. Engage and ask them to come to your places, and not just these 4, but other millennials across the country. They're hungry. They just want support. Sometimes they need the money to go with it so that they can show up and be here, but they want to be engaged. And so people will drive us forward. Let's go and have so much fun, people. And thank you for being here this morning. Let's go and solve traceability. Yes. Thank you, ladies.